Good morning. My name's James Stanger, and this video from my third aid library is to talk about, can IVF single-handedly fix the falling birth rates in Western countries, or is there another way? The video was prompted by this news story that came just recently across my desk. Sweden's PM puts IVF at the centre of re-election bid amid record low birth rates. Ulf Kristersson aims to expand state-funded IVF as Sweden grapples with the lowest fertility rate since records began, it said. Ulf Kristersson's government recently increased the number of state-funded IVF attempts granted to aspiring first-time parents from 3 to 6. Now he says that if his party, the centre-right moderates, whose minority-run coalition depends on the support of the far-right Sweden Democrats, to hold on to power in September's general election, they will also fund for additional children. It comes after official statistics showed that this year, that despite often being cited as one of the best countries in the world to have children, Sweden's fertility rate sank to 1.4 last year, the lowest since 1749. Of course, the falling fertility rate is naturally things that we're all becoming subfertile or infertile. And John Aiken has often talked on this, particularly male infertility, his concerns about IVF. And in this article in February this year with Rob Norman, they argued that the past half century has witnessed a dramatic decline in human fertility, as reflected in the total fertility rate. This decline in total fertility rate is thought to have been triggered by an increase in resources and knowledge that precipitated a significant decline in infant mortality. This, in turn, led to a reduction in the desire of couples to have large families, supported in recent times by a series of factors, including a delay in childbearing as women acquired the education and autonomy to enter the paid workforce, the progressive urbanisation of advanced societies, and for many, a seismic shift in life's purpose away from procreation and into self-fulfillment. They argued, however, that if human societies experience sub-replacement levels of fertility for a prolonged period, then there is a danger that our fundamental fecundity, our ability to reproduce, will become compromised. The lack of evolutionary selection pressure on fertility, the excessive use of reproductive technology, and the pervasive presence of environmental pollutants in the environment are all relevant in this context. Addressing the causes of human fertility decline is therefore critical if we are to manage our population rather than become its hapless victim. So naturally, when I read this, I thought of this article, The Time for Men. Can their involvement in the domestic sphere revive birth rates? It's by a group of French authors. And it says, it isn't quite what I thought, but it's an interesting argument. Therefore, the time of men, when men will further participate in child rearing, is bound to take on new meaning and a growing importance lies ahead. This refers to the upcoming period when men will start being actively engaged in household tasks and infant care. The transformation in men's role within the family is not only necessary for maintaining fertility levels, but also contributes to men's own well-being. It should therefore be encouraged, particularly by emphasising the following 3 points. 1, couples, men and women, must be educated, note they must be educated about the importance of male involvement in domestic life to achieve their family goals, rather than letting them reduce or to vanish. Men's participation in domestic tasks and infant care should be materially supported through financial and societal measures, including generous parental leave for both men and women. Young people should be informed about the physiology of fertility and its decline with female age. Assisted reproductive technologies slightly improve outcomes in older women by increasing the number of available oocytes through ovarian stimulation. Yet the decline in oocyte quality remains identical to that encountered in natural conception. Maybe the solution is for women to keep working and for men to take over the role of stay-at-home parent and housekeeping. But maybe there's other options. So what did I do? I went back to ask Google AI, find me some recent publications that explore whether IVF can fix the falling birth rate in Western countries. And of course, the AI came back with the argument, recent publications conclude that while IVF is vital for individual reproductive autonomy, it cannot single-handedly fix falling birth rates in Western countries. Right. Studies indicate that assisted reproduction only boosts the total fertility rate by 0.02 or 0.1 children per woman, remaining limited by high-cost biological constraints and delayed childbearing. Overall, the academic consensus is that IVF serves as a crucial right-based service for overcoming infertility, but broader societal and economic reforms are required to address the systematic causes of below replacement fertility rates. So they gave me 4 papers on this subject, and I'll just quickly go through them. The first one is a WHO publication that highlights that while medically assisted reproduction plays a critical role in holistic reproductive health care, its overall impact on demographic shifts is modest. It argues that no single intervention will fix falling fertility, but rather a compendium of adaptive rights-based policies. The second one is reporting on the dramatic global fertility decline. The Lancet emphasises that maintaining population size in high-income economies will rely much more heavily on structured policies supporting parents such as childcare and parental leave and open immigration rather than clinical fertility interventions. The third one, in the Economics Observatory, details how baby bonuses and fertility treatments primarily shift the timing of births rather than the overall completed family size. It argues that holistic economic and cultural shifts, such as affordable housing and reduced work-family conflict, are necessary to bridge the gap between actual and desired family sizes. And the last one from Human Reproduction Updates is a comprehensive paper by Bert Fauser and others outlines how the contribution of IVF to national birth rates remain modest, varying between 3 and 10% of total births in European countries. The authors stress that clinical access cannot fix socio-economic and structural factors that lead couples to delay or foregoing having children. So, the true drivers of declining birth rates was basically the cost of living, career and education, and lifestyle choices. And if societies want to reverse falling birth rates, the current consensus is that governments, policymakers typically rely on systemic socio-economic interventions rather than medical technologies. And the models include subsidised childcare, paid parental leave, and financial incentives, including baby bonuses, tax breaks, and child allowances to offset the costs of raising a family. However, there is an argument which I came across in Reddit, which sounds good, but I think it might be a little bit biased. But it raises an interesting question about surrogacy. So this comment, which had 10 views, and they said, we all know that people in families generally want kids. However, the problem is there are too many single people who, let's face it, will never be able to create a husband and wife unit. Too many men are scared to talk to women, and there are too many women who can't find men who aren't jerks to seriously date. Now, this, I suspect there's a little bit of bias in this comment. However, this will lead to a decrease in birth rates. My solution to do this is to create economic incentives for surrogacy, so single men and single women get tax deductions for starting a family. This is the only way. And I thought I would just pursue this because in 2021, there were a series of articles on surrogacy where they indicate that clearly surrogacy is an issue that raises deep ethical and religious problems and considerations. Normally, a person who wants a child accepts the medical risk of pregnancy. In surrogacy arrangements, it is the carrier that takes the risks. However, as a result of growing demand from couples who cannot conceive on their own, together with the technological developments in IVF, in addition to acceptance and readiness of women to take part in the process of surrogacy as surrogate mothers, the practice appears to be spreading to more and more countries around the world. It's a good article, this one. However, rigorous safeguards and protections need to be in place, both for the gestational carrier and the intended parents. And I think if we're going to use surrogacy as one of the tools to address falling birth rates, then governments need to become really, really proactive in this form of reproduction. Because one area that will cause some people some concern, but for others not, will be this case where children of single fathers created by surrogacy. So I think in England, about at least half all the surrogate arrangements are for gay men. But I can't find that paper. I read it somewhere and I just can't find it again, but I'm sure it's there somewhere. The existence of single father families formed by surrogate is becoming a more visible reality, even though this type of family organisation is still perceived with stigma and negative attitudes by more than traditional sectors of society, because it raises some concerns regarding the psychological well-being of children who are born into single fathers families via surrogacy, in many cases to gay single men who wish to become fathers. So in conclusion, single fatherhood and surrogacy do not contribute to any adverse consequences to the children's psychosocial development and adjustments, and there is no observed evidence to why single men, irrespective of their sexual orientation, should not be fathers via surrogacy. And so deeply embedded with this article is this concept that, in fact, we don't have to rely on women to delay having childbirth to fix our live birth rate. Maybe, in fact, one of the arguments might be to allow men to have their families via surrogacy and not worry about women having to delay it while they have their education. Now, that's something that hasn't really been talked about, but it may well be in 10 or 20 years' time that men may take far more control of their own reproduction using surrogacy rather than the current process of natural conception and IVF. Okay, so maybe at this point you think this is a totally dumb idea, and it probably is in some ways, but currently couples and single women are having children later in their reproductive life. and often, when I first started IVF, the average age was 26. Now I think it's about 35. In many IVF clinics, the average age of women continues to rise to over 35, the upper sweet spot for fertility. And even 35 is actually creating some issues. Many only have one child because of the low success rate and the cost of time and effort. But eggs frozen when young, so under 30 years of age, are viable for more than 10 years and are just as fertile. And a publication just recently, which I've talked about in another video, has demonstrated the eggs can remain viable if they're frozen from young women. So it's quite conceivable that you could be having eggs out from a woman in her mid to late 20s, all the way through the 30s. And if you look at this, the interesting thing, this is from the CDC data in America up to 2022, looking at the age, about the pregnancy rate. So right across the board, you can see that even from 30 downwards, the fertility rate is falling, and it just slowly accelerates. And somewhere around about 35, you probably say there's maybe a bit of a sweet spot, but it's actually probably less. But the really important thing about this graph is the yellow line, which is the use of donor eggs and embryos, really donor eggs. And nearly all donor eggs in America come from women under 30. And the other thing that's happening is this one. This is the number of fresh embryo transfers and the number of frozen embryo transfers, which have risen huge. And if I went to 2026, this would be off the scale. And one of the reasons for that is we're treating older and older women, but more and more older women are having DNA genetic testing of their embryo, what's called PGT-A or aneuploid testing. And so as women age, more and more embryos are being frozen. So one of the consequences of treating older women is the rising number of FETs. And that's okay, except for what we're now finding is that FET cycles have a higher incidence of pre-eclampsia and other hematological aspects of pregnancy, plus a slightly increased incidence of miscarriage, even with euploid embryos. And so this is another reason why we really need to be thinking more about this type of system rather than this type of system. And the other really interesting thing about the graph is this green line, which is the uptake of births over time from donor eggs or embryos, but they're nearly all donor eggs. 2026, we'll probably see it more like up around 40,000. However, it's okay. So it's still a dumb idea, but really is it? I can see if I sit and look at, I'd be involved in IVF since started my PhD in 77, been IVF since 82, and clinically up to around about 2016, 2017, and then online education since then. I am concerned. I can see no end to the dilemma of older women having fewer children. Each year, in more countries, find the birth rate falling, and all they can do is offer IVF. They could throw huge sums of money at it, but I don't think it's going to make a difference. I think there is a huge groundswell movement to delay childhood, until the point when you're actually trying to fall pregnant when you are most subfertile. It strikes me as quintessentially crazy, but I don't know the answer to it. Let's just for one moment, though, set aside all the huge issues about commercial surrogacy when applied to infertile women and ask, are there any redeeming features that would cause one to reconsider? But of course, If a woman has one or more cohorts of eggs cryopreserved, say from 25 to 28, then at any one time a selection of eggs may be thawed and fertilized with a partner's sperm, if they have a partner, and transferred to a surrogate at the time of their choosing. If no pregnancy ensures, it's easy to thaw a few more eggs and try again, either with your own egg, with your own cycles, or with a surrogate. But more interesting is women may have one or more several surrogates at any one time, and hence all their children compressed into a time frame that suits them. So rather than delaying every pregnancy is between, say, 2 and 3 years apart, you can, even though you might shudder at the thought of it, you may have several surrogates running at the similar time, so that your children are being born at whatever rate you like, but you can contain all your childhood into a defined time. Also, the women can continue to work or travel and only become involved when the child is born. And I mean, I don't know how the separation of delaying childhood is separated from being pregnant and having a child, but they're both really important. But at least this way, a woman can continue to work if they've spent a lot of time increasing their education and their work file. This allows them to continue to work and only become involved in child rearing when the child is born. It could also allow for twins or triplets being born at the same time without the obstetric risks. So a lot of women will be more than happy to have twins coming through IVF, even though everyone now is only putting one single embryo back, because single pregnancies give you a healthier child. But allowing 2 or 3 surrogates at the same time would allow all your children to be born in one cohort. And even though you might think it's crazy, and it is in some ways, it does allow a far better management of time rather than spending 20, 30 years of your life having children growing up through the family risk. But more importantly, allows family to have more than one child, even though the cost of child rearing is expensive. It does reduce the long-term time commitment to family development. Now, before you give 1,000 reasons why this is a dumb idea, at least society should like to consider creating the legal framework to allow women to choose this option without fear and stigma. So in Australia, for instance, you can only use surrogacy if it's altruistic and there's no payment to the surrogate apart from costs. And so there's little incentive for young women to offer to be surrogate rather than doing something else. And I actually think that this altruistic aspect is not serving anyone in the real world in 2026. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago when everyone loved altruistic donation, but that has proved to be catastrophic. So in societies like Australia, where you can only donate altruistically, there are no sperm donors, because the need for sperm donors has been increasing more and more single women and lesbian couples use AI services. And so the arguments encouraged in the early 80s about everything should be altruistic because there's no pressure, I don't think that works these days. And I think we need to get rid of the concept of altruism. It could certainly be part of it, but I think requiring people only to be altruistic is crazy. And we far better turn around and say we should reimburse people in the correct and proper way if they want to be surrogates. I still fail to understand, because I'm an old white male, a bit of whatever, how in the space of a generation or two, there are so many reasons not to have children. As a society, there are real implications for a falling birth rate, and the cost of encouraging women to embark on parenthood will only grow. At the very least, society should forward plan to allow women the surrogate choice and to provide time to ensure there is no harm in women who wish to use surrogacy and to women to whom surrogacy is an attractive option in life. And that's a dangerous area for me, but I'm sure there will be a proportion of women in the society who will be more than happy to have someone else's child, as long as they're being paid correctly. Who are we to say that there is a handmaiden, being a handmaiden, but that's the right term, but that's what I'm using, is such a bad thing? I can see a time when a handmaiden may be the most honourable of professions. Things do turn. If you look at how we've gone from treating older women and donor eggs, etc., genetic testing, things can turn very quickly as soon as you decide it. We have in a short time now encouraged and promoted women to freeze their eggs for future fertility. That's happened very quickly. And currently, of every 10 women who decide to have their eggs frozen, only one will come through and use those eggs. And for them, that works well. but we're encouraging older women to use donor oocytes to overcome the age-related decline. So we've already seen in the space of maybe 10 years a huge increase in the use of donor oocytes and a huge increase in concept of women promoting fertility preservation. And I would see surrogacy only a natural extension of that. It is all, overall just a matter of perspective. Currently, the commercial surrogacy market is poorly regulated, and if it is approached from the context of family building a lifestyle, it need not be a pariah. In fact, I think that in America, where the surrogacy market is a bit ad hoc, it desperately needs to have a government to impose a very strict set of rules and how it should be managed both for the surrogate and for the donating parent. Indeed, for many, the current obstetric risks are due to women having children later in life, while surrogates could well be quite young with a low obstetric risk. And there have been a couple of arguments about legal parent surrogacy. This is one which is fairly difficult to read. This paper examines how legal parenthood should be allocated in surrogacy under English law, and the author argued that we need to shift the focus of discussion to the surrogate's negative intention not to be a parent as the key to move away from the current gestational model. I mean, I have to say, I don't really understand some of the way that this text has been written. Overall, focusing on the surrogate's negative intention allows us to view surrogacy in a nuanced way, away from false dichotomies, and contribute to a more compelling case in favour of actively facilitating surrogacy. Challenging article to read. But there is some debate in IVF circles that human fertility is falling. Just look at the perm spore quality to know that things are not well. But the falling fertility is also a lifestyle, and it's not just biology. IVF may help by embracing surrogacy to augment or support women who these days are reluctant to bear the burden of motherhood. Rather than making surrogacy difficult to access, by applauding it may just be the way. Just as The Handmaid's Tale was a story about female oppression, then far into the future, The Handmaid may well be rewritten by women for women who demands are putting lifestyle over obstetrics. I suspect that women will drive the uptake and the normalisation of the handmaid or surrogacy, and in so doing show that IVF can address in some way a falling birth rate. Of course, this whole topic is outside my skill set. I'm just a sheer embryologist. But simply, if the state wishes to increase the birth rate by supporting surrogacy, then it does need to allow women to be paid for carrying the pregnancy for another person as part of the IVF process, and paid well. It also needs to provide tax rebates as encouragement, provide a health and legal framework to remove exploitation and as a register of interest. It may be if people are paid, for instance, say $80,000, $100,000 to have a baby, and it's tax-free, right, that's a huge incentive, and many women, I think, will take advantage of that. But it has to be done inside a state-sanctioned and controlled environment. They do have to provide a health and legal framework to remove exploitation register of interest, and they have to support the obstetric costs of pregnancy and provide some form of support if it does not go according to plan. And we ensure the legal transition from child to surrogate is straightforward and is without complication. There's a case recently of a Australian couple who had a child by surrogacy in, I think, Brazil or somewhere in South America. And for a whole variety of reasons, they can't go back because the child is not deemed to be theirs. I think the government needs to get off their butt and organise to make surrogacy a real arrangement. So there are a couple of other things right at the very end of this video. This is a thing that posted just recently in May in BioNews, the future fertility. And they said, well, what we're saying before, governments wishing to address falling fertility rates must focus on creating conditions in which people feel financially secure, socially supported, and informed enough to build the families they desire. This will require long-term planning and investment. The challenge is not simply encouraging people to have more children. It is to create societies in which children no longer feel economically risky, professionally damaged, and biologically out of reach. And you know what? I think they're dreaming. And just to turn on a coin and go back in a different way, I came across this article in Premier Christianity, which I thought is a nice way to end up. Because it's coming back from paying thousands and thousands of dollars to encourage women to have children because of the cost, etc. And this one has got a more slightly Christian view of it, which I think we should at least recognise and pause to think about it. So I've decided to include it in the end of my video. The UK birth rate has fallen its lowest level in half a century. While some blame economics, the author argues that IVF is encouraging us to put our fertility on hold while pursuing our dreams. But for Christians, the technology comes with difficult ethical implications. That's partly true. Because IVF exists, women now say, well, I think I can do, well, not so much women, but couples. There's men and women in this, but they're all happy to defer childhood while they have travel and they build the house, and all that is fine. But it does mean that IVF is being used as a backup tool, which allows people to delay childhood in some way. Christians should therefore resist the panic and technology of childhood. The answer is not coercive pronatalism or the infancy or the fantasy that reproductive technologies can rescue us from every cultural trend. Well, I think we've already shown that IVF is not capable. It's huge cost if we were used to IVF to try and augment the falling birth rate. Instead, we should work to rebuild a society where marriage, family, and children are once again seen as good things, supported economically and honored culturally and understood spiritually. Well, this is a Christian view. But ultimately, the birth rate crisis is not just about whether Brits can afford to have kids. It's about if society can afford to go on without them. So one of the great contradictions of modern fertility is that modern life encourages us to put our fertility on hold to enjoy the benefits of consumerism in our 20s and 30s, and then sells the chance of motherhood back to us at a premium later in life. IVF has been a source of some difficult conversations in the church over recent decades. Certainly, Christians should respond with deep sympathy to couples who experience infertility. The pain of longing for a child is real and profound, but we should not ignore the ethical questions that IVF raises. Many believers are deeply uneasy about the routine creation, freezing, and destruction of embryos, tiny human lives made in excess because success rates in IVF remain surprisingly low. And you can easily dismiss that. And when you work in IVF, you push back from that. But if you worked in IVF for as long as I have, and I started out when we only ever made 1 or 2 embryos, and every embryo we made we put back, and even though our success rates weren't particularly successful, there were hardly any embryos being frozen, and it was a very uncomplicated and very sympathetic approach. But there are a lot of challenging, controversial views being collected in this video, and some do have resonance with me, including one consequence of treating older women is the need to test the genetic health of embryos by PGT-A. This has led to more embryos being frozen and transferred back in HRT cycles, with increasing risk of pregnancy complications and at far greater cost. This has led to the rise of IVF corporations with a focus on profits and increasing use of technology for what was once a simple and a personal procedure. We need to think outside the box to address these concerns, and while surrogacy seems a stupid idea, maybe its time has not yet come, but it will as sure as night follows day. My name's James Danger. I'm an embryologist with 50 years experience, as I've demonstrated in this talk. But these videos are my Fertai's YouTube channel and my attempt to bridge the gap between information you may need for your fertility treatment and the most recent publications available to your clinic staff. I am not a medical person, and this information is not medical advice, but it may help you in knowing what questions to ask about your treatment with your doctor, and maybe to help in understanding the advice you receive. If you like what I'm doing, press subscribe, tell other people about what I'm doing, and leave a comment. And this has been supported by my Fertai channel, which is an online EQA program, which is available at Fertai. And I think I would just like to this point say thank you for persevering with me to the end of this video. I know IVF is a personal journey that involves the actions of many techniques, ideas, concepts, and people, and it helps to understand as many aspects of this as you can. And I wish you all your best, and I'll say goodbye.